Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you. We acknowledge that this cathedral sits on the ancestral territories of the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, the Lekwungen-speaking peoples, and we do that in a spirit of ongoing reconciliation, gratitude, as well as truth-telling. Welcome to Christ Church Cathedral. My name is Donald Hunt, and I'm the Director of Music here. We're all getting quite used to COVID protocols, but I'll just take a moment now to remind you of what we have in place here at the cathedral. So we're asking you to continue wearing a mask for the duration of the concert and as long as you're in the building. We are asking you to please keep some distance from each other, or from your bubbles anyway. And we're also asking you that once the concert is finished, we need to ask you to leave rather promptly. And that's it's not because we're trying to be unwelcoming, quite the opposite. We just need to limit the amount of time we're spending together in this space. Before handing things over, I'd just like to say a few words about upcoming musical events here at the cathedral. The Victoria Symphony is with us for the last 2 weeks of October. The first program, which is music by Vivaldi and Piazzolla, is now sold out, but there are some tickets left for the concerts on October 29th and 30th. Those concerts, the same program, featuring Haydn symphonies. In early December, we welcome once again the return of our presenting partner, EMV, who bring us a program of Corsican polyphony featuring Constantinople and Affiletta. This concert is part of a series of early music from non-Western traditions. A few weeks ago, we had the first concert here in the series. It was a program of music from West Africa, also featuring Constantinople from Montreal. In addition to selling out, it received a standing ovation. Now, why am I telling you this? Because you still have a chance now to get your tickets. We had to turn people away, and we were really disappointed to have to do that because of our capacity limits. I would encourage you to go as soon as you can via pacbaroque.com or the cathedral website and get those tickets for the concert in early December. Before that December event, I want to first tell you about a special liturgy that the cathedral is planning. So in the church's calendar, November is known as the month of the dead. This is because it's the month where we get festivals like All Saints and All Souls, both of which are kind of tied up with the pagan festival of Halloween or All Hallows Eve. On Tuesday, November 2nd, which is All Souls Day, the cathedral marks all who have gone before us with a special service, a solemn requiem, where we remember, or literally call to mind, our deceased loved ones. This year, the service will feature Gabriel Fauré's Requiem, sung in its entirety. And because this is a service and not a concert, entry is of course free. So please just come and bring yourselves, your cares, and your memories of loved ones past. In doing so, be prepared to attach those memories to some stunning music as we offer up Fauré's Requiem to the creative force that Anglicans believe inspires all that is beautiful, all that is alive. And in this season where the leaves are beginning to turn and fall and the chill of winter is ever near, also all that is dead in the world around us, yet ever present in our spirits. Speaking of beauty, we are so fortunate here at the cathedral to have developed a partnership with the Carr String Quartet for the past couple of seasons. We are also grateful for the support of our institutional sponsors. They include the Gail O'Riordan Climate and Legacy Arts Fund at the Victoria Foundation, the BC Arts Council, and the Capital Regional District, as well as a number of private supporters, many of whom are here tonight. So thank you to those institutional sponsors, and thank you as well. Well, it's hard to believe that we're nearly at the end of this momentous task that the Emily Carr String Quartet has taken on, of playing the complete string quartets of Beethoven. Here to give us something intellectual to hold on to about today's music, please would you welcome Robert Holliston.
Hello, can everybody hear me? I think you can. Thank you very much for being here. It's always a pleasure to introduce and, of course, to listen to the Emily Carr String Quartet playing Beethoven. We'll talk a little bit about the circumstances in Beethoven's life surrounding the presentation of this quartet. It has a reputation of being kind of a gateway to the music of Beethoven's later period, which we've heard fairly recently. And I'm going to quote somebody who used to be a professor at UVic, Mr. William Kinderman, who makes a very important point about this. He says, the dark emotional tone of this quartet, also its stylistic and its technical challenging demands, its stylistic demands on the listener, point towards the evolution of the style that we generally associate with Beethoven's last period. But another writer adds this: a perfect description of the F minor quartet. In extremely concise form, the quartet sums up most of the qualities of the heroic period. This would include the works that we associate with Beethoven's perhaps most dramatically public pieces like the Sixth, Fifth, and Seventh Symphonies, the opera Fidelio, etc., the Emperor Piano Concerto. He says, the qualities that we'll hear in this are robust force, melodic poignancy, formal concentration, abrupt interruptions, bold key changes, and an irresistible rhythmic drive, the latter part being perhaps one of the most important and neglected elements of Beethoven's style. So we don't know 100% exactly when Beethoven wrote this piece, probably towards the end of 1810 and the beginning of 1811. In 1810, he completed fewer works than in previous years, and this may be in part because of a tremendously upsetting event in his personal life. As you know, Beethoven considered himself an artist in the Society of Vienna. He considered himself as an artist, therefore sort of set apart from the average run of humanity. And he was welcomed into the homes of many aristocrats, and sometimes didn't really fully compute that did not necessarily mean that they were accepting him as an equal. As an artist, he was revered, but he would still belong to a class beneath theirs. And he made the mistake of falling in love with the daughter of one of the families that he was frequently welcomed, Therese Malfatti, and he proposed to her. And so a message was sent to him via one of his friends that not only, of course, was such a marriage out of the question, but that except for special musical occasions, he would no longer be welcomed in their house at any time. So that was a pretty abrupt and hostile reminder that though he was the premier composer of his day and somebody who was always welcome to entertain the audiences of the aristocracy, he must under no circumstances whatsoever forget that he was essentially a servant. So he sent Therese Malfatti a sort of goodbye present. It's the little piano piece we know as For Elise. And he probably did this with a few tears and a little bit of disappointment, and he said that really he has no life at all outside of writing music, but that was a pretty good life. He wrote about having the enjoyment of quartets every week. And I'm going to introduce you to a person we haven't mentioned yet, Baron Nikolaus Zemskal von Domantovich, a Hungarian lawyer and amateur cellist who was a tremendous admirer of Beethoven his whole life. He was a subscriber to Beethoven's first publication, and here he is again with Opus 95. He was a very serious character, and this may be, in fact, the source of the nickname for this quartet. Of course, it has a serious character all of its own, but it is the only nickname given by Beethoven to one of his quartets at all. Any of the other nicknames come from other people. And he often kidded and teased his friend, let's just call him Baron Nicholas, because the rest of his name is really unpronounceable. And he joked and teased him about his serious nature, and in fact dedicated this Quartetto Serioso, dedicated to Herr von Schmecksal, and written in the month of October by his friend Ludwig van Beethoven. So more or less, he's written it in 1810. And Beethoven, in fact, enjoyed the support of loyal musical friends. When I say loyal musical friends, they may include some aristocrats, but they also included professional musicians. And they were especially important to him when he was trying out experimental works such as this one. He could workshop them, as it happens, and hear how they were developing, what things he might change. He, in fact, considered the importance of playing music of this experimental nature to a small circle of connoisseurs. Now, this is something else that William Kinderman pointed out, that during these years, around 1810, 1811, 1812, Beethoven was beginning to make a very serious distinction between music written for very serious audiences and music written for amateurs. And by amateurs, I don't mean lovers of music, but people who were basically listening to it as background music and weren't that interested in being challenged. And this is a piece, actually, that Beethoven wrote to an English person about, his friend Sir George Smart. He asked him to help ensure that it was never to be performed in public. Now, a few years, or around this time, sorry, I'm going to amend that. A few years earlier, we'll find the institution of public chamber concerts taking place in Vienna by one of Beethoven's other aristocratic patrons. So when he says he wouldn't want a public performance, he means something very much like this, where people buy tickets. If he has an audience made up only of loyal and true connoisseurs, a small circle of them, he has control over who actually comes to hear the pieces. We have taken that control away from him, of course, and we're happy about that. Because with this piece, we're moving into uncharted territory. And the fact was that although it was completed somewhere around 1811, it didn't get its first performance until 1814 and wasn't published until 1816. Now, here are some other events in Beethoven's life in 1810. He completed a piano sonata commonly known as Les Adieux, and he had begun it when somebody who was, I suppose, as much of a friend as an aristocrat can be, Archduke Rudolph, he left Vienna, and Beethoven wrote this piece, the farewell, the absence, and then upon Archduke Rudolph's safe return to Vienna, the return. He also spent a lot of time working on incidental music for a play by Goethe called Egmont, and I'm only mentioning this because Goethe loved Beethoven's music for that play. He didn't love most people's music, but he loved Beethoven. He wrote, "He entered into my intentions with an admirable stroke of genius." And they actually met one another, which was a pretty momentous occasion in 1812. Goethe said he had never seen a more intensely focused, dynamic, or fervent artist. And in turn, Beethoven had admired Goethe since childhood. Goethe's words at the way his art was developing was, "I have surrendered to my inner self." And that could almost be interpreted as an inspiration for Beethoven to do the same thing. So this idea of short, motivic, fragmented kind of melodies will be heard throughout much of the first movement. The first movement is so concise that Beethoven doesn't give us an exposition repeat. He didn't with the earlier Appassionata sonata either. And you listen for extreme dynamic contrast. Yes, we heard that with Opus 18, number 1, but now you're going to hear it more and more and more. In the much gentler, or rather gentler, second movement, there's still this sense of dark foreboding in the texture and most especially in the harmony. And again, motives in the third movement. Listen for a four-note motive that opens, followed by silence. And this series of interruptions and halts will characterize this first section, and again, a tender middle section. If anything, the fourth movement is the most original of the four. We'll hear themes that are not so much developed as sort of repeated with various shades of dark and light. So Opus 95, the Quartetto Serioso, does, as William Kinderman said, sum up a great deal of what characterized the middle or heroic period, but certainly also points to what we'll hear in Beethoven's last quartets. So please enjoy the Emily Carr String Quartet's performance of Quartetto Serioso, Opus 95 in F minor. Well, bravo. That was astounding. And that's what is meant by concise. We're moving now to a quartet that belongs essentially to the middle period. And in the middle period, of course, we find Beethoven, in terms of the most well-known biographical fact about him, losing his hearing or beginning to be having to reconcile himself with the chronic nature of his hearing loss. And much has been written about that, of course, and about the serious depression he almost went into. Also, many people have written about how, compared to Mozart at least, Beethoven was a very slow worker, and his process of composition was quite laborious. So I put together a list of some of the works that he composed and compiled between 1803 and 1806. And they include the piano sonata, usually known as the Waldstein, the Eroica Symphony, the Triple Concerto, the piano sonata, usually called the Appassionata, the Fourth Piano Concerto, these three Razumovsky quartets, the Fourth Symphony, and the Violin Concerto. That's quite a lot of composition to do in 3 years, and it's worth mentioning that he also had in his filing cabinet the first version of Fidelio, and he was pretty much ready to trot out into the rehearsal hall the Fifth and Sixth Symphonies. So that's an incredibly productive period. If 1810 wasn't as productive, he had already made up for it a few years earlier. It is this quartet, or these Razumovsky quartets, which prompted Beethoven to say to a violinist who had complained that the writing was almost impossible and to understand or to execute, he said, "Oh, they are not for you, but for a later age." And in fact, by the time these came along, they were as removed from the quartets of Opus 18, wonderful though those are, nobody's casting any aspersions at them, but just in sheer size and scope of imagination and innovativeness, they were as far removed from those quartets as the Eroica Symphony itself is from the Second Symphony. Now, the fact is that Count Razumovsky, the aristocrat who had commissioned these works, had that quartet, the sort of workshop quartet I mentioned in a previous talk, led by Schuppanzig. And they always liked to work on Beethoven's quartets, and they were willing to accept the fact that they would have to really work hard, that many of the things would be a little bit incomprehensible at first. And sometimes it's said that they laughed during the rehearsals because they assumed Beethoven had made mistakes. And Beethoven would therefore have a chance to, as I said earlier, workshop his work and hear what it was like. So these quartets, the three Razumovsky quartets, were premiered in the same concert in February of 1807. They were completed in 1806. And it's interesting to point out that one of the Viennese reviewers wrote this: "They are very long and difficult. Please don't be discouraged by that statement. Compared to the works of Mahler, they're not that long. Deep in thought and well worked out, but not generally comprehensible." However, 3 months later, in the very same journal, somebody pointed out that in Vienna, Beethoven's most recent difficult quartets have become more and more popular. So he was enjoying, I think, a great amount of interest in his work, and it was Count Razumovsky not only who commissioned the works, but who arranged and approved of the first public performance. It was he who had instituted the first public series of chamber music performances in Vienna to begin with, and the arrangement with a commissioner of a work was that he generally had, or she had generally exclusive use of the work for a year maybe, or even up to 2, and then after that the composer could publish it. Now, it's interesting to note a little bit about Count Razumovsky. His father was a humble Ukrainian peasant, but he became a singer in the Russian Imperial Choir in St. Petersburg, and then became one of Catherine the Great's favorite lovers. I never thought I'd get to say that in front of an audience. And he was rewarded by her with riches, with real estate, with lands, and also with a very wealthy wife. And so he went into international service, and ultimately in his mid-40s was able to settle in Vienna. And he loved the arts. His son did as well. And his son also enjoyed displays, lavish displays of his wealth, to the point where actually he lost quite a lot of it, but let's not detain ourselves with that. He was considered rather haughty by many other aristocrats, but not to Beethoven and not to the members of his quartet. At one point, a palace that he had built for himself, I think of the Dunsmuirs in that castle, it was destroyed by fire, and he made sure that the 4 members of the quartet were looked after with a generous pension. And he also insisted that every performance of Beethoven's music be rehearsed sufficiently so that it was given just as Beethoven wanted and not otherwise. So the commission for this work came at around December of 1805, which was the time of the Battle of Austerlitz, in which the Russian and Austrian armies suffered great casualties and great defeat. And so the Viennese hospitals, schools, and convents were filled with injured soldiers. That's something that must have affected Beethoven. You'll all remember the story of his fury when Napoleon had himself appointed emperor and then began invading other countries after he'd promised he wouldn't. So the Count suggested that each quartet include a Russian folk song of some kind or another. So the finale, the 4th movement of this work, Opus 59, number 1, does just exactly that. And there's a great deal of depth of feeling in this work. The difficulties are in its length. Certainly the first movement is to the string quartet medium what the first movement of the Eroica was. In fact, in the Eroica there is an exposition repeat, but like Opus 95, Opus 59, number 1 does not have an exposition repeat. And if, I have to look at his name to pronounce it right, Schupanzig gave the first, or instituted the first public chamber music concerts. With these 3 quartets, it said that Beethoven introduced a symphonic scope and a symphonic dimension to the writing of chamber music. So you will hear, in the first movement, something very large scale, something almost symphonic in size. In the second movement, we have what's described as the most unorthodox and unusually constructed scherzo Beethoven ever wrote. And it actually seems to point the direction towards not only the scherzos of Mendelssohn, but those of Mahler as well. We have a very tragic, very dark funeral march-like slow movement that virtually remains in the minor keys, and the Russian folk song is quoted in the final movement. Now, somebody wrote about this first performance and said this: actually, there was not a large assembly there, but one consisting of very zealous and attentive music lovers, and that is the proper public for this finest and most intimate of all musical associations. That was a composer very well known at the time, Johann Reichhardt, and as somebody said, and so it remains today. So, thank you very much, and please let's all enjoy the Emily Carr String Quartet's performance of the Razumovsky first. Thank you.